What's going on, everybody? Welcome back into another Leagues Cup Digest show. Wait, it's MLS Digest. We're finally back to our regularly scheduled programming, back for Week 28 action. We've had a month-long hiatus because of Leagues Cup, and it's not technically over yet. We still have the final between the Columbus Crew and LAFC on Sunday, as well as the third place game. But we're not going to be previewing that, looking ahead to that. That's going to be a banger of a final. Make sure to watch that. But for these purposes, we're finally back to regular MLS action. Teams really only have about 8 or 9 games left of their schedule, so we're really, down into this playoff push with a lot of teams vying for these spots and especially home field advantage. And we got 12 games on the docket this Saturday. Back to these loaded slates. The 5 teams off are including the 4 teams still in Leagues Cup, so Crew and LAFC in the final, and then the third place game for that last CONCACAF Champions Cup spot being Philly Union against the Rapids. So they'll be battling it out, so they won't be their games were postponed. Philly was actually scheduled to host the Crew on Saturday, and that was postponed to, I think, this coming Wednesday. So they'll still play that soon enough, but not obviously on Saturday, as they both have weekend games. And the 5th team being off is Vancouver, who was slated to host LAFC, but LAFC is obviously in the final. So we're finally back. Shouldn't be any issues like we had in Leagues Cup with, weird lineups and things like this with these participating Mexican teams. Leagues Cup for us went pretty okay. We did pretty well for ourselves in terms of the betting aspects, but it wasn't on an objective, neutral level as exciting, I would say, or as, just filled with amazing games as last year's was. Maybe that's just a Messi effect, but I would say overall from a team-to-team basis, it just wasn't. It didn't have that same feeling around it, and the viewership and attendance levels kind of showed that, back that up as well. So a bit happy to be past that, and now we could finally focus once again on normal MLS play. And we're going to go through each and every game. By the way, the summer transfer window has closed. All these teams are packed, or most of them at least are packed with new talent. Some players went away in the meantime. Teams replaced needs for the most part, while others did basically nothing, and they remain in a bit of a power struggle. So we're going to go through each and every team, pickups, and who they got, who went out, as we go along each game, and what to expect from these teams, and how this first game back might shake out for each team in terms of who's kind of going to fill into these spots. So let's go ahead, get into Week 28 action for MLS. The slate starts with Minnesota hosting Seattle, and Minnesota was one of the busiest teams in the transfer window. They signed 6 players, including 2 DPs, one of them being Kelvin Yeboah from the Belgian league. He's a striker, so that kind of adds to the competition with Oluwase, Pukki, and also Pereira from the Argentinian league as kind of a right winger or attacking right mid, including some other players. Markinich from St. Louis as a left back. He was kind of shaky though. And Oluwase is out for this one. Kelvin Yeboah has been training with the team. He should be set to go here. The team hasn't played because they got knocked out of Leagues Cup for 24 days. They've had 24 days of rest going into this one. So, whether the match sharpness is there is a question, but they've definitely had the rest. And, Yeboah could take the starting job here right away since Oluwase is out. And the Sounders, on the other hand, they went much deeper into Leagues Cup. They got to the quarterfinals before losing once again to LAFC at home. They played all their 5 Leagues Cup games at home. And at home, they've had very good form outside of their 2 LAFC losses in the recent month or so. But on the road, they're a bit more of a question mark to me. I'm personally just haven't been very high on this team in general. And they don't have anyone outside of Pedro de la Vega, who is kind of that creative spark, and he's been dealing with too many injury problems. He got injured in one of the last League Cup games. I think he was on the bench for the LAFC game and didn't feature, but it seems like he's healthy enough to make the squad now. So whether he starts here is also a question. And in Leagues Cup, actually, Seattle beat Minnesota 2-0 at home. But going away from home, I'm not sure. I think Minnesota will improve down this stretch and potentially sneak into the playoffs. But right now, there's too many question marks about these players coming in, who's really going to play, because Pereira, once again, if I didn't mention it, is not going to feature in this one, at least. Something with a visa, I believe. So it's kind of hard to call. The watchability rating here, as I see it, is kind of in the balance. It could be interesting depending on which of these new signings feature for Minnesota. But I still like their attack as it is when they are full strength. But they won't be completely here. And for that reason, I'm going to go for a draw. Moving on, we got Montreal taking on the Revs. And I have this watchability pretty lowish, but that could definitely change. I just have it as of now. But based on reports about these lineups and players coming back, that leads me into trusting this and taking a flyer here on our first best bet of the show. Both to score in this one and over 2.5 at a good price. Both these teams are the two worst in expected goals allowed in general in MLS play. And Montreal, they do have road struggles when it comes to scoring, but at home, that's where they've been most productive. And that also doesn't mean that they've been a fortress at home at the same time. Even though they've been getting results at home, they do tend to leak as well. And New England, on the other hand, they don't have the best expected goals numbers on the road. Far from it, actually. But with the news of Carles Hill coming back, the coach said that he was hoping to give him a very important role coming into this game earlier in the week. And now, as of today, it's confirmed that he should be starting. So with Hill there, their DP, their 10, their entire playmaker, who everything runs through, I completely trust New England to at least contribute here in the score sheet. I think Montreal still probably has the edge in terms of the result, in terms of getting one of these teams getting us 2 goals. But also the likes of Borrero, Bayraktarovic, they've been training recently. The Revs have also went out early in the round of 32, so they've had a couple weeks to train with these players first training individually and then taking part in scrimmages and such in the past week and a half. And Vrioni as well, who's been out in the same time. He should be training leading up to the game, like today, tomorrow, finally. So he could feature off the bench, but I think the main group, these wingers and especially Hill, being back, just pulling the strings, I will take my chances, because even though the Revs aren't the greatest offensive team, Montreal, it doesn't take much to kind of unlock that defense. They did make a couple wingback signings in replacement to the ones they lost, such as Ruan Lassiter. They also lost a couple players in midfield, like Toy, he went to the Timbers, and Choinier, he's going to the Swiss League. He's in the midst of a deal, so I don't think he's going to be playing. It's not completed yet, but regardless, I think the Revs are getting a lot of players back. They're going to be going for this push now, even though they're obviously dead last in the East, but it's still tight enough that they can, make a slight comeback maybe. And they're healthy now. They've had a couple weeks off to get these players healthy, and based on these reports, the lineup should be pretty full strength. Even though the Montreal's midfield might be a little bit younger, their attacking options up front are still good enough, and the Revs, especially on the road, I will never trust to get a clean sheet. So it's really about who gets us that second one, and I'm going to take the flyer here. Charlotte takes on the Red Bulls. These two teams are both top 5 in terms of the expected goals allowed numbers in general, to the best defensive teams in the entire league. We know about Charlotte, especially at home, being just a clean sheet monster, and they're going to be fully healthy here. These are two teams that didn't do well. Charlotte did do a decent business in the window. Red Bulls did absolutely nothing. We'll get to that. But Charlotte, they tried to cycle through a couple number 10s. Some kind of fell through, including Miguel Almiron coming from Newcastle. But that didn't go through, and they ended up going with Pep Biel, a Spanish player from the Greek league, I believe. They got him on a loan, and he won't be featuring actually because he's still working out stuff with his visa. I think, based on the reports, he's supposed to come in most likely for when they play Atlanta, whenever that is, probably in a couple games. And besides that, they re-signed Świderski after loaning him out to Italy, And I still don't think he should be the starting 9. I think he's just a better depth piece or maybe suited somewhere else on the pitch. But Agaming's been kind of decent enough, and he's more of a true 9 that I guess just for now you still kind of have to, run him out there before they, we'll see if they go for it in the next window or over the off season. But besides that, they also signed Tim Ream from Fulham, who is still obviously a very good defender, especially at the MLS level. That only bolsters his defense and the depth they have. So that was a great signing for them, but probably just a little bit, underwhelming on the attacking side because they really have the foundation to go for it kind of, but they really fully didn't. Red Bulls, on the other hand, didn't do much. They only sold Frankie Amaya to Mexico, and then they got another DP midfielder on a loan. But the fans and most people expected them, they should be going for a DP9 to complement kind of Morgan and Manuel. But they didn't do anything of the sort. And the Forsberg situation with his foot injury is still kind of murky. And I don't know if he's going to play in this one either. The reports are kind of sketchy on that as well, how he's been recovering. He's out of the boot, but that's been for like kind of weeks now. The training, how he's been training is uncertain. And that's kind of why this watchability for me is, towards the lower side, because these are two defensive-minded teams. Red Bulls didn't bolster up their attack. Neither did Charlotte too much, or their one player that they did won't be featuring. So, I would choose Charlotte to kind of edge this one out in a typical 1-0 if I had to guess, but there shouldn't be much action in this one. Teams are going to be finding their footing. We might see a decent amount of unders or ties as teams get back into the swing of things, especially these teams like these two teams who both got knocked out in the groups and will have like three, almost 4 weeks off. So we'll have to see, but I'm going to go with Charlotte to edge this one out. First week back, and we already got a fantastic matchup, top 2 in the East, probably the matchup of the week if you had to guess and choose, and it's Miami taking on Cincy, and no surprise here. I'm second best bet, both to scoring over 2.5. Miami is pretty healthy besides the Messi front. They've shown they can score without him and win without him especially. They're going to be at home here. The last meeting was when Cincinnati completely embarrassed Miami at Cincy. It was 6-1. And I think Busquets got sent off in that game too. But anyways, since he's 5 points back of Miami, if Miami wins this, I think it'd be pretty clear to say that, they would win the East or be in the, real driver's seat to win it. And on top of that, the Supporter Shield. And Cincy, on the other end, they have had a lot of problems in the back recently. And going into Leagues Cup, they lost all of their last 3 MLS matches. They exited Leagues Cup in, pretty embarrassing fashion, losing 4-2 to the Union at home. Even their home form hasn't been that great. They got Miles Robinson back from the Olympic team or whatever it was, and that he still hasn't helped. The signing of Awazim hasn't helped. Sorry if I'm butchering that, but it just hasn't helped. They still have too many injuries on this back line, and Acosta was dealing with some injuries, but he has been training. He did feature in that Union game for about half an hour, and I think the Santos game as well, both of those for like half an hour or so. But now he's been fully training since they got knocked out in the round of 16. He's, based on the reports, he should be pretty fully good to go starting. And since he also signed Gio from Como in Italy. He used to play on St. Louis, I believe, and he's been a pretty serviceable MLS striker, and I like that addition. They try to go for some bigger names such as Bertarame from Monterrey and even Josh Sargent in Norwich for some bigger money. Neither of those went through. They signed Gio, and I still like it. They kind of have a bit of more younger strikers like Valenzuela, and Baird hasn't been the greatest. Santos I'm really not high on, and I think Gio is could definitely earn that starting spot right away, or at least be a good option to have off the bench if anything. And he should just get acclimated right away. But regardless of if he starts or not, this is a pretty straightforward bet. Miami's backline is still very leaky. I don't think the Martinez signing is going to completely fix everything as it is. And Diego Gomez for Miami has been linked to Brighton. I don't know if that signing has gone through 100% yet, but it probably will go through. But he won't be going until January, so it's not like he's going anyways. So he should be sticking around to the end of the season. And just these players, regardless, without Messi, have kind of found their footing. Miami's brought in a lot of, South American talent that has dominated this league. And I just expect there to be goals in this one, just like there was last time. Probably favor Miami here with how poor Cincy's defense has been. But this should just be a blockbuster game where both should have no problem finding the net, and both could honestly score two. That's how confident I am in this one. Two of the top teams in MLS play, matchups like this usually deliver, so I'm just going to kind of blind bet it. NYCFC returns to action, playing the Fire in this one at home, where NYCFC is 8-1-3 in MLS play at home. The Fire only have 2 wins in, a dozen or so away games in MLS. So the odds obviously favor NYC here. NYC coming off a pretty surprising Leagues Cup run. They beat Tigres in the round of 16 and then took the Crew, who are now in the final and probably, were one of the favorites to win the whole thing. They took the Crew to penalties, eventually lost on penalties, but made that a great challenge, and they surprised me, personally. And they're going to be basically fully healthy here. They didn't do anything in the window in terms of additions. They loaned out Talis Magno again. The Fire, on the other hand, got rid of Shaqiri with that contract. They signed Lassiter from Montreal for, in exchange for some money. And his contract runs out at the end of this season. So it's basically like a loan for these last 8 or 9 games. But I think that's a decent addition. Nothing crazy. But they also got rid of the sporting director, Heights. And that was probably their most important move rather than getting or getting rid of a player. So kudos to them on that end. Maybe that'll change something, hopefully, for once. But regardless, the Fire got out early in Leagues Cup, got grouped, lost both their games. Players like Kuipers and a couple others didn't play. They just got rested. And as well, because they got grouped, are having this extra rest. So basically like a month off. So they're going to be well rested here. Both teams are fully healthy. And the Fire might be 14th in the East and the Revs 15th, aka dead last, but the East compared to the West is really still, everyone's still basically in it for these final playoff spots. It's really that tight. And, 8 or 9 games left for every team. A couple wins, especially in the East, can still get you sneaking up and have you feeling like you could do something. So these games are going to be a little bit tighter, I feel like, and both these teams, I feel like will need to find their footing again, especially the Fire. And I feel like the games between these two teams recently have been tight. So I'm just going to be a homer here and take the Fire to kind of maybe get NYC a little bit of a challenge in their little home field advantage they get on these baseball fields. But yeah, I'm going to go for the Fire to sneak out and get a point out of this one. I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. Houston hosting Toronto in Houston. Houston has a unique advantage. They just have one of the best home advantages and just general form at home in the entire league. And they finally went out and got their DP number 9 in Ezequiel Ponce. And he featured in Leagues Cup. He scored a goal, got another goal kind of taken back. It was an own goal. So he's featured for the club. And they signed a younger winger in Anali who also featured. So both those signings are acclimated. They've had time off as well since Leagues Cup, since they went out in the round of 32. Same with Toronto, who had a kind of weird Leagues Cup. They beat Red Bulls on penalties. They beat Pachuca, and then they got bounced by Miami in their first away knockout game. So both these teams have had the same amount of time off, but Houston in the much better spot. They're in 6th in the West right now, and I think they're going to want to go for it, especially it's a pretty high, top tier end of the West, top heavy with Galaxy, LAFC, RSL. I think they want to get that 4th spot and host a home game because that's going to be crucial, and try and catch up to some of these teams as well. And what better way to do it starting off at home here? And it's going to be hot in Houston, and they're just used to it. That's how they get these teams late in the summer. and going into the later stretch of the season. And Toronto is just not good defensively. Bernadeschi and Insigne are both kind of dealing with knocks. Insigne kind of more on the end of doubt, a doubt to start. And we've seen it. If it's just hard to trust Toronto if these two, key players for them, these Italians, aren't really clicking and aren't just pulling a rabbit out of the hat. Like, the rest of the team is garbage. They did sign a defender, Wingo, who could help them. It remains to be seen. But in the first game back here, I just think Houston with the home field advantage. I think this is a good price just generally to take them on the money line. But for my best bet here, I'm going to take ML and over 1.5 to get this to plus 100. I think it's a really good price. I don't see, Houston has one of the best defenses in the league, and especially if they can get ahead, they know how to close it down and really punish you on the counter. And I think the only thing that's been lacking, right, is that 9 to kind of kill teams and really separate themselves as one of those higher end teams. And Ponte's looked pretty decent so far. I think he still has a bit of a ways to go in terms of just being at an elite level in this league, but he can really, make a name for himself. And the only worry here is with Carrasquilla, who was kind of had a knock towards the end of Leagues Cup, missed out on those games, but he's been training. It was kind of a minor thing, and whether he features here off the bench or starts is questionable. But I think even without him, they picked up an ally, like I said, the winger. They have just a generally loaded roster, in my opinion, and that midfield is really strong. So I think they should have no problem dispatching up of Toronto, who I think is still fortunate to be 8th in the East and will continue to slip up. But the East is pretty bad, so we'll see. I think it's gonna get really tight for Toronto. I truly don't even want to talk about this game. It's gonna surprise everyone in the dumbest way, probably. We got Nashville taking on Austin. The watchability here is the lowest of any game for me. Nashville had their new coach come in to start Leagues Cup. They got 2 bad results, losing to Mazatlan at home and then not qualifying for the knockout rounds after not getting a result against New England, a pretty poor group. He hasn't really implemented his strategy yet. I think he's kind of trying to make more out of the roster than its limit is. And the roster just doesn't have that much high-end talent. They only signed a midfielder from Australia, a younger midfielder, Yazbek, who did feature in Leagues Cup, but it remains to be seen how this Nashville team is going to look. It's hard to trust them. They did get, obviously, Zimmerman back, so that should improve their defense, but it's really a lot of useless possession for this team, especially in midfield. They don't have anyone that can really bring the ball forward, in an effective way and chance create, for players like Mukhtar Suraj. And Austin, on the other end, they did have a decent transfer window. They got better for sure. They signed Bukhari, the winger, who did feature in Leagues Cup a bit. And then they signed a couple defenders, one being a wingback and another central defender. So Austin as well does have some of the worst expected goals allowed numbers in the league. We know how they play on the road as well. They like to sit back a little more, but I feel like they could, take some chances here. They definitely gained some confidence beating the 2 Mexican sides in Monterrey and Pumas in Leagues Cup. But it's hard to trust either of these teams. They're sitting in the positions they are in each of their conferences for a reason. And for that reason, I just expect a very low-scoring game, a very ponderous approach, lacking of any ideas from either of these sides. And if I really had to pick, I'd give Austin the advantage just based on the talent they have. But, this should just be a low-scoring, kind of dead game. But for some reason, I feel like, that's why I don't want to even. It should be the freest bet if you wanted to bet on this of the week. But for some reason, like, Austin games just don't go the way they're supposed to ever. So I won't be. All the games are free this weekend, by the way. I will not be checking this one out to watch. So yeah, probably gonna be proven wrong here. But there's really not much. Neither of these teams, did something insane in the transfer window to suggest that they're gonna, even if they sneak into the playoffs, to suggest that they'll, make a decent run. So I'm gonna go for a 1-1 draw in this one. Kansas City takes on Orlando City, and this one's hard to call. I would favor Orlando in this one. Orlando has really picked it up. They picked it up going into Leagues Cup. They had a pretty decent Leagues Cup. They were unfortunate to lose when they did in the round of 32 to Cruz Azul in penalties. But that's just the way the game goes sometimes. But before Leagues Cup, they had 4 wins and a draw going into it on the bounce. They won both their group games, beating Montreal 4-1 and then beating San Luis on penalties. And they re-signed Duncan McGuire to a longer-term contract. That was their only business of the window. Whether they decide to use that as like leverage to, sell him in the next window or something remains to be seen. But as of now, he's staying, and he's been looking okay enough to, play for that starting job. And the players, regardless, such as, Ojeda and all these other kind of younger players, Facu Torres always picks it up in the summer. Like, they've bounced back from a really dismal start. And Kansas City, on the other end, only signed a center back, Fernandez, from Europe. So I don't think that fixes too much. Their attack is pretty poor. Agata really carries it, and the only thing they have going for them here is the home advantage. But both these teams have had the same amount of time off. Kansas City actually plays in the U.S. Open Cup semifinal at home as well against Indy 11, a USL side, and they play that on Tuesday. So this game is on Saturday. They only have 2 days of rest between then, and you have to think that just such a terrible season for KC here in MLS, they're really going to focus on the Open Cup, because that should be technically a free win, something that they should be able to get by, and then they would face either LAFC or the Sounders in the finals. So in terms of this matchup here, they might be looking ahead. I honestly wouldn't even like their chances regardless if that was not a game on their schedule, after this game. But Orlando's been the hotter team. This is kind of in pick'em range, and if anything, I would favor Orlando to sneak this one out. It's interesting to see how Kansas City is going to line up here, because they do have that game, the 2 days of rest between, but they haven't played in so long. So they might play some of these players like 45 minutes. But regardless of who plays, I think Orlando has the stronger lineup. They've been in the stronger form. The only concern being the rust maybe for each of these sides. So I'm going to lean for a 2-1 Orlando win, and they continue to climb up the East. RSL is back, but they're looking much, much different. They had a lot of business in the transfer window. They signed one of their star young players, they sold one of their star young players in Andres Gomez for over $11 million. They also sold Barajas, another winger, and they signed in the meantime finally a DP number 10 in Goncalves. I don't know how to say it. A number 10 from Copenhagen, who has decent numbers in a pretty decent league in Europe, and he's already arrived, as well as Marchuk and Brook, other wingers, one from the Polish league and one from Australia, I believe. Also Benji Mitchell. So it's going to be a bit of a new look team. Gomez was very productive, and they still have obviously Anderson Julio, Diego Luna, Matty Crooks, all these other attacking kind of midfielders and wingers. But it's interesting to see who plays in this one, because all these new signings have kind of been, acclimated a bit. They came over to around a week ago or so, and they've been in training. But it really remains to be seen, if they just get into it early, because a lot of these players are coming from far away into also this elevation that RSL has, which obviously is an advantage for them in most games, but for the new signings to get used to it is a little different. So I'm not sure what kind of starting lineup they roll out here. Diego Luna, I think, based on what I've seen, is suspended for this one based on yellow cards. So Arango is going to start for sure. Matty Crooks, Anderson Julio, I think that's still a strong enough team, right, to just dispatch the San Jose team, but not something I really want to put my money on in terms of one of these best bets that we do, because it's uncertain. The lineup right here is uncertain. San Jose had a pretty, decent Leagues Cup a bit of some confidence boosters, especially that huge win over Necaxa. So, I could see San Jose giving RSL trouble in terms of scoring, but it's hard to trust RSL without knowing the lineup specifically because different players are going to take different amounts of time to get acclimated, and I'd rather not. Maybe if I post something on my Twitter or make additions, then it's going to include RSL in some sort of bet, but still you have to favor RSL here. They've been on fire all season. Arango, I know he'll be itching to get back after that 4-game suspension. He did come back for that final Leagues Cup game where RSL got pretty much bounced by the Dynamo out of the groups, but this is still one of the strongest sides in the West. I think they're going to remain up there, but it's going to take maybe a game or two for these players to actually feature and see how much they can replace the loss of Gomez. So I'm still going to go for an RSL win here. I say 2-1, maybe a little bit closer than they'd like. Galaxy back at home where they've been on fire, one of only 2 teams in the league, including Red Bulls, who haven't lost at home. Taking on Atlanta, Galaxy's only business was signing none other than Marco Reus from Dortmund, an aging star, yes, but still very capable of producing in MLS, and it's really just a depth piece that can only do them good and really no harm for such an attacking-minded team. They do leave themselves exposed at the back, but that's just the way they play and the sword they'll kind of live and die by. So Atlanta on the other end, just to finalize it with the transfer window being done, Almada, Giacomakis, and Caleb Wiley gone. They only brought in a number 10, a true number 10 in Miranchuk from Atalanta in Italy, which is their big money signing. He's still basically in his prime, and it's a good sign for the league that players like that want to come here. But they didn't really add around him. But I do kind of like some of the players around him that can stick around, such as Jean De Silva, Lobjanidze, the wingers. They do really need a number 9. I know Daniel Reus has kind of been still producing as of now, but they have a lot of money to spend with the outgoing transfers they made, and they just didn't get it done in this window. But Miranchuk still, can kind of do it himself a little bit, and especially against the Galaxy, they're vulnerable. So, you still got to favor Galaxy in this matchup, but it remains to be seen whether Reus and Miranchuk play. They are eligible. They have received their visas, so they should be in the squad, at least on the bench. But whether they start or not is a different story. They've both been obviously training with the teams. It's just about, each of their personal, situations and fitness and things like that. So still have to give the edge to the Galaxy. Could be a shootout, and that's why the watchability is so high. Galaxy games are just generally entertaining. Aude, one of their wingbacks, has been out for a while. Won't be back for this one, so that leaves them a little bit thinner back there. Joveljic, who's been out for a while, has been improving, but recent reports say that they're not going to overexpose him or risk him here, especially starting. Maybe he'll make the bench just to make the bench. But regardless, Galaxy's attack still firing on all cylinders, regardless of their Leagues Cup exit. And they're going to want to continue to hold on to that first West spot. I'm going to go for a 3-1 Galaxy win. This matchup between DC and Dallas is one of the earlier games on the slate, but I wanted to include it at the end here as it's part of my last best bet, and it's a 2-legger, including the Timbers and St. Louis game coming up after this one. So I just wanted to keep it together. And we start with both to score, which I'm taking in this one. Neither of these teams did really much in the window to improve. Dallas got Ruan, a wingback, and DC kind of really nothing, I think a defender. But that doesn't help their situation much. DC has just been a goal machine. Even in Leagues Cup, they also lost in the round of 32 to Mazatlan. Not a great team who obviously had a great run themselves. But both these teams are going to be fully healthy, and especially the part I like the most here is Dallas, who has been out for a while now being grouped. And even during the Leagues Cup, around that time, both Ferreira and now Alan Velasco were training and only a week or two from really getting back into the full strength, right? Full fitness. And it's been a couple weeks even since then since they should have gotten back, and now recent reports say that they're going to be included basically full strength as they can be for the players that weren't out for the whole season. And with Ferreira, Velasco back, Peter Musa being one of the leading Golden Boot players, and on the other side you have Benteke fully healthy. They've been on a bit of a rest too. DC leaks as much as anyone, and Dallas, you tend to trust them with their home form, but with all these players back, I think they have as good of a chance as possible to hurt DC, and this should be a high scoring game in general. But I just don't think either of these teams can hold a clean sheet with the situation being what it is. And obviously DC has I think I like the players around Benteke for DC. Meanwhile, Dallas, even if Ferreira and Velasco weren't featuring, maybe Peter Musa's been stealing to show himself. They've been both these teams are just very leaky. Dallas is young at the back, and this is a toss-up. This could be a high-scoring draw, or one of these teams steal it. But personally, DC, neither of these teams tend to hold clean sheets. Dallas, especially on the road. DC, doesn't matter where they play. So for the first leg, I'm gonna trust both these teams to score. For the second leg of this final best bet, I'm going with the over 2.5 between these two teams. Timbers hosting St. Louis. This was actually the Timbers' last game in Leagues Cup. They traveled to St. Louis where they lost 2-1 or 3-1, I believe. Yeah, 3-1. These teams have played twice already. Both were at St. Louis. And the Timbers before this, they have just been on a tear at home, specifically offensively. 6-1-0 in their last 7 home games. Even in that draw, including all those 7 games, they've scored at least 2. And St. Louis had one of the best transfers of any MLS team, signing all these Germans, Teichert, Becker, and Hartel. And they've all been, had enough time to adjust, playing Leagues Cup as well. They've been scoring. The attack looks much, much better. The attack was already creating chances. It's just the players there were not finishing them. It's not like it was a dead, creativity-wise. They got Henry Kessler as a center back from New England, who is a pretty decent signing back there, but still on a general level, that back line is still very thin and a little bit young. And traveling-wise, St. Louis can never be trusted to hold a clean sheet. So, Timbers like to run it up at home. Evander actually got injured in the last game when these two teams played a couple weeks ago, and he's still not going to be featuring here, actually, based on today's reports. So, even without him, this attack is clicking, and Rodriguez, Mora, Anthony, anyone else who fills in, the midfield is still fine, and St. Louis themselves can offer something here as well. Both these teams are leaky. Kamal Miller actually is also out due to suspension for the Timbers, even though they did pick up a center back in the window. I just see goals here per usual. The Timbers, both the teams to score rate anyways, has been hitting like 90% or something, and it should be a pretty straightforward one. Even without Evander, both these teams have the production to get by. So that's going to wrap up this one and get us to a pretty decent price. Thanks for tuning in once again, everyone. Make sure to also check out the Leagues Cup final outside of this MLS slate. We got a rematch of last year's MLS Cup. So regardless of maybe how underwhelming the tournament has been, this should probably make up for it. The two best teams in MLS, in my opinion, the day after Saturday's slate. So we're going to have a loaded weekend. And once again, make sure to follow my Twitter at MLS Digest if you're interested in more potential bets that we might have as these kind of murky lineups come out. And make sure to like and subscribe to the channel if you've been enjoying the content. We're finally back in the swing of normal MLS as we wind down at the end of the season. And I'm excited for what's to come. And I'll see you guys in the next video.